Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. I'm going to continue review of CDFM module 4, but I'm going to wrap it up today with my competency 8, 9, and 10. And so now we build a prototype, now we build an equipment, we need to test the item to see how they perform in the field. Again, we're building these capabilities so that we can give them to the warfighter to use during the war or exercise. We need them to be able to perform and be suitable, be maintainable, survivability. We can have all those considerations when we are reviewing those equipment. And so we begin with page 4.8.1, which talks about the types of phases of test and evaluation. So what is test and evaluation? That is used to identify any deficiencies, right? You got to put the equipment to work to see if there are any kinks that we need to iron out. And so we learn about the deficiencies in the operational and technical performance of that equipment so that they can be resolved at any time. You have operational tests and evaluation, and it's conducted to determine the system's ability and effectiveness when you put it in operational. And that's what I started off talking about. If it gets attacked, if that equipment is attacked by the enemy, can the human being, the HSI that's in it, can they be integrated and survive if hit? There's some equipment that have to go through the live fire test and evaluation. The LFT&E permits the evaluation of survivability. That's where your survivability is tested. And when you're developing the equipment, you have the DT&E, developmental test and evaluation. So I think we go into each one. That is correct. And so to do all these testing, at the bottom of page 481, it's saying that the program manager has working integrated product teams, the WIPITs, WIPT. So they have different working level groups to help the program manager test and evaluate the equipment. So DT&E, developmental test and evaluation, is on page 482. And what it says is a well-planned and executed DT&E program supports the acquisition strategy. And remember, acquisition strategy comes at milestone B. So you're tying in that knowledge. And the systems engineering, because you got milestone B, then you got the EMD phase, engineering manufacturing. So I got a couple of check marks at the top of page 3. That first paragraph around the middle of it, DT&E should increase the robust system level and system of systems level testing and evaluation to ensure, there's a key part, that the system has matured to a point where it can meet the operational test and evaluation and operational employment requirement. So again, as you move along the stages in the developmental stage, when you develop and you're testing, then you want to fix the issues, the deficiencies, so that when you get to the operational, when you get to the live fire test and evaluation, that you can be more confident that equipment performs. The next paragraph, a robust DT&E reduces technical risk and increases the probability of a successful OT&E, which is operational test and evaluation. So I think it goes developmental, operational, and the live fire test and evaluation is part of it. During early DT&E, the test responsibility may fall to the prime contractor, who will focus testing on technical contract. So if the contractor is building, it makes sense, right? Think about it. If the contractor is building that equipment, they should have tests in place, developmental tests in place to check to make sure that equipment is doing what they expect it to do. At the bottom of page 484, you have modeling and simulation. What you need to take away from here is that modeling and simulation, which is the same thing as test and evaluation, it occurs in all the different phases of the process. So modeling and simulation is integral to and inseparable from test and evaluation in support of acquisition. So it happens at all the milestones as you're moving along in the process. Think about it. You're moving, testing, making changes, adjusting, testing again until you get to actually deploying the equipment. All modeling and simulation, so I'm reading in the last paragraph on the bottom of page 484, must be accredited by whom? By the intended user, and the program manager represents the intended user or the operational. All right, what's OTA? I don't remember, so let me look back. OTA, let's see if it's mentioned here. I think this was, hold up, let me find my pen. That's key, OTA, operational tests. I gotta come back to that. Accreditation can only be achieved through a robust verification, validation, and accreditation process. Therefore, the intended use of the modeling and simulation should be identified early in that resources can be made available. So once I figure out what OTA means, and I think is the program manager in some instances is not the only approving official at that level. So he has a designated operational testing agent who supports it. But let me come back to that. I might stumble on it. All right, on page 485, so again, if I don't know, I'm not gonna pretend like I know, right? As mentioned earlier, operational test and evaluation is conducted to determine system operational effectiveness, suitability, and survivability. It's repeated again there, so I'm not going to go over there. My check marks on page 486 says to the evaluation of test adequacy. So you got to test and evaluate that the test is actually performing the results that you intended. So you have realistic combat-like conditions, If you're gonna put the equipment in combat, you wanna have like situations. Production representative system of IoT, initial operational test and evaluation, articles off production line preferred, all right? We have adequate resources, and representative of typical users. So just think of what the testing looks like. They want to make it as realistic as possible. So that's what the evaluation of test adequacy is talking about. And also, when they're doing this evaluation of the test adequacy, when you're doing test and evaluation, I know a key question that I had, it was more of an ethical question. If as the program manager, while you're doing the test and evaluation, you identify, let's say it's a small crack in that equipment, streamline crack, a small crack or hairline crack, and you have already built, let's say 100 of these items. As a program manager, do you report it or do you just allow it to continue? The correct answer is you report it. You stop the line, report it to whoever the decision makers are, because that can potentially become a safety hazard in the future. So that was like an ethical question on this test and evaluation. All right, that OTA, I remember seeing it somewhere else, and I think it was a question that was asked. It's gonna come back to me, who asked. All right, live fire on page 488. So some of your equipment, let's say you're up armored Humvees. We put all these things on the Humvees to protect survivability, suitability, be able to monitor and protect our soldiers as they ride in them. And so those equipment might be considered at the top of page 489, covered systems. Right? Covered system is a DoD term that is intended to include all categories of system requiring live fire. A covered system means a system that the D Director of Operational Test and Evaluation, acting for the Secretary of Defense, has determined to be a major system within the meaning of that term. So don't forget you have the USD AT&L, because we're dealing with acquisition, the Secretary of Defense, and you also have an operational. So you have a director of these testing and evaluation who will determine what is considered a covered system. So it has to be determined a major system within the meaning of 10 US Code 2302, which says that equipment, a covered system, has user occupied. That means a human being sits in this equipment. Conventional ammunitions program or missile program. Conventional munitions program for which more than 1 million rounds are planned to be used. A modification to a covered system that is likely to affect the significantly affect the survivability. So if you have a Humvee that you're supposed to be able to survive in, then I up armor the Humvee, then that's still considered a covered system that I still need to do the live fire. Personnel survivability, live fire has statutory requirement. If we're gonna have human beings in these systems, we gotta make sure they're able to survive. So personnel survivability is a requirement of the covered system. All right, let's talk about the role of test and evaluation at milestone A. As I mentioned, testing and evaluation occurs from the beginning, milestone A, B, C, and all the different phases. You gotta test the items as you get that. So test and evaluation strategy is developed. So at the top of page 4810, so no actual system testing is done, but the plans are in place. We come up with the strategy to test. We come up with the plans to test. So they don't actually test, because think about it. You're doing material solution analysis. You're coming up with the courses of action. You'll determine what that equipment needs to do. So everything's on paper. You got technology maturation, risk reduction, or technology development phase, determine the technology risk. And it's not until milestone B that you actually start doing the testing, because you actually start building things after milestone B. So projects that undergo milestone A decision have a test and evaluation strategy, a test. And I think I remember seeing this again, wink, wink, all right? So at milestone A, you do a test, TES, test and evaluation strategy. And that's the strategy for addressing modeling and simulation, including identifying the risk and early test and evaluation strategy. ACAT 1 program, so most of it is straightforward. The last bullet says the test and evaluation strategy is approved by the USD AT&L under Secretary of Defense for Acquisition Technology and Logistics and the Director of Operational Test and Evaluations. So here's that again, that Director of OD, the DOT&E for all programs on the OSD level oversight list. That's milestone A. So test at milestone A, and then the WIPIT, those working level groups that works for the program manager, are helping him put this stuff together. Program manager is not working alone. All right, so the next section is the role of test and evaluation in milestone B. So test and evaluation occurs throughout the acquisition process. It's called a test evaluation strategy developed in milestone A, and then you actually move to milestone B, where it's called a TEMP, a test and evaluation master plan, TEMP. So at milestone B, it is called a TEMP and is required in place of, instead of the test and evaluation strategy. So test turns into a TEMP at milestone B. The rest of it is straightforward. Yep. And the role of test and evaluation after milestone C and during the LRIP. What is LRIP? Low rate initial production. Remember, LRIP was the smallest number of that equipment that we determined that was okay, that was approved for to develop initially. That's your LRIP. So it conducts initial operational tests and evaluation, IOTC, conduct the live fire is done at milestone C, provide evaluation at the full rate of production, because remember, you gotta, after you do that initial, then you gotta do that full rate, and plan follow-on operational tests. The role of test and evaluation during the full rate of production, conduct follow-on operational tests and evaluation. Once you get all the equipment out in the field, you gotta still be testing them to make sure they're still holding up. All right, so you gotta repeat again on page 14. So anytime you see test and evaluation strategy, immediately associated to milestone A, and the test and evaluation master plan, the TEMP, you associate with milestone B. So all of that is repeated again on page 14. And I think that's all I have. Component approved. On page 18, they mentioned the TEMP again. But what I want, let me do that. The bottom of page 17. So we're going to, so we're at milestone A, because we're talking about the test, the strategy. And it says, for all program and OSD test and evaluation oversight list, the program manager with the test and evaluation WIPIT group, working level, integrated product team, providing support, must submit the approved tests to OSD for staffing and approval prior to milestone B. So before you get to milestone B, they must already have the testing strategy developed. That's what I'm getting out of that. And then at the top of page 18, what it says is the test should be submitted 45 days. So now we're getting more specific. So 45 days before milestone A, you got to submit the test to OSD for approval. The USD AT&L and the DOT&E approve the test, so that's a repeat. For programs not on the OSD oversight list, the component acquisition executive or who they designate approves the test. So if it's a major DOD level program, then the DOD level USD AT&L will approve it. At the TEMP, let's see what's the timeline for the TEMP. So the requirements is the same. The program manager through the WIPITs, the working level groups, will develop the TEMP prior to, let's see where it says it, milestone B. So that's in the first paragraph on page 18, carrying on page 19, using an evolutionary acquisition strategy. It evolves, right? It doesn't have to start from ground zero, then work your way up to developing. It can evolve. Let's say we enter into the technology development phase. There's something already on the commercial shelf that can get us started. So evolve strategy. So the TEMP must be consistent with a time-phase statement of desired capabilities. We got to make sure everything is in line with the capability development document. Who develops the capability development document? The same people who developed the initial capabilities document, which is the JROC, the Joint Requirements Oversight Council. So remember how this journey began. The JROC, who is chaired by the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, they identify the capability gaps based on the mission in the National Defense Strategy. Once they identified the mission, then they identify the capability gaps, and then it's published in an initial capabilities document. So that's the journey. The third bullet on page 19 also says a TEMP must be submitted not later than 45 days prior to milestone B. So 45 days prior milestone B. So the same thing, 45 days for both. So that should be easy to remember. Test strategy versus the plan, which is the TEMP. All right, moving along on competency number 9. Now let's make some decision assessments and reporting requirements. So the 3 milestone A, B, and C are discussed in this section and the decision point. Now remember, the milestones are decision points for that milestone decision authority to look at the data of what the testing, the results, the risk, the mitigation of those risks and so forth, all the data up to that point. So on page 2, it goes into milestone A. You got to repeat again. At milestone A, he reviews the proposed technology development strategy. So you have material solution analysis, you get a course of action, and then you also going to develop the technology development strategy. You're going to have the technology, the test and evaluation strategy, which is here. You also have a SEP. So remember, I told you for this exam, you're going to need to know what happens at milestone A, B, C, and full rate. So they give you a good snapshot on the bottom of page 2 over the 3 and for milestone B and milestone C on the next page. So you got the TDS, the test, the SEP, the Klinger-Cohen Act, DOD information must provide confirmation of compliance, right? So when you deal with technology, Klinger-Cohen Act should trigger. You have program protection plan. If you got to introduce any critical information, if you have foreign allies that's going to be using some of that equipment, you got to have a protection plan. So all of that, oh, these are actually pretty good. Acquisition program baseline. So all of this stuff is being reviewed. Then you have milestone B on page 493. Remember, tests in milestone A, attempt 45 days prior to each milestone, you complete the program, the program manager or his representative completes the TEMP, the master plan, and how they're going to test the equipment. 494 begins at the bottom, milestone C, capability development document. So you have the production development and the capability production developed document. And you have the temp, because again, you started the temp, so you got to update it. And then you have independent technology readiness assessment if necessary. So under decision reviews, there's 4, got something going here. So it says there are 4 major decision reviews, the developmental decision. So material development decision review, the preliminary design. So again, I'm on page 495, directly under decision reviews. The MDD, material development decision, preliminary design review, the critical design review, and the full rate production decision review. So these are decision reviews. Then your decision points are milestone A, B, and C. So really you got 7 decision, either review or decision points. Material development decision review is the initial capabilities document. The analysis of the alternative plan play a major role in this process. Over on page 496, the PDR, preliminary decision review, so that's the second one, is usually conducted PDR before milestone B. The CDR, which is the critical design review, occurs mid-phase of engineering and manufacturing. So CDR is the EMD phase. So I'm writing in my book, if you're wondering what I'm doing, off in a paragraph on what's happening in that, because I didn't have it written for that one. Then at the bottom, you have the full rate production for MDAPs, major decision acquisition programs, and other OSD test and evaluation oversight programs. Production and deployment has 2 major efforts, the LRIP, low rate initial production, and the full rate production and deployment. So that's repetitive anyway. It's not really saying anything new there. All right, page 499, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, the USD ATNL, is the Defense Acquisition Executive, is the Milestone Decision Authority, conducts the Defense Acquisition Board, the DAB, the AP. Who sits as the co-chair for the Defense Acquisition Board? That's not on this page. The Vice Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff is the co-chairman of this Defense Acquisition Board. Tie your information together. Second paragraph says the Defense Acquisition Board advises the USD ATNL, Defense Acquisition Executive, on critical acquisition decisions. And repeat, the USD ATNL chairs the Defense Acquisition Board. So the DAB members are the executives, the vice chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, the secretaries of the military departments. So they're telling you what makes up or who makes up the Defense Acquisition Board, the DAB members. So let me write that there. All right. Then if I have an information system on page 10, so I have a Defense Acquisition Board for the general major acquisition programs. And if it's an IA information acquisition program, I have an acquisition board, 4910. The ITAB. So the ITAB, yeah, provide the forum of approving acquisition category for ACAT 1 AM. That's your automated MAZE, major automated information system milestone decision points. So you have not just the Defense Acquisition Board, you have an Information Technology Acquisition Board also. The USD ATNL can design or designate a Chief Information Officer to be the decision maker for the information system. On page 4911, it introduces again the JROC, the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, who is chaired by the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. That's the first paragraph on page 11, first line, reviews the program and designated as the JROC interest and supports the acquisition review process. The rest of it is straightforward. On the bottom of page 13, it says I have, okay, so you got to know all these working level groups. Integrated product team. So remember I said you have a working integrated product team, the WIPIT, that helps the program manager do all these tests and evaluation. So integrated product team, they got the definition, interdisciplinary team composed of representative from different functional areas. There are 3 types of IPTs at the bottom of that paragraph. So you have IPTs, then you got 3 types. The first one is overarching IPT or IPT. Number 2, issue, that focuses on strategy guidance, program assessment, and issue resolution. You have the WIPITs, which we talked about earlier, the working level WIPTs that identify and resolve issues. You got to know the difference between them. And then you have the program level, the PIPT, number 3, PIPTs. The program level that focus on program execution. I'll write that there, PIPTs, program execution, resolve issues, and make assessments. That focuses on program execution and may include representatives from both the government and the contract. Exit strategy, program-specific accomplishment that must be satisfactorily demonstrated before the program can progress. So they need to have a particular checkpoint or objective that must be met for them to move on to advance the program. Some level of demonstrated program outcome, the accomplishment of some process at some level of efficiency. So all of this, the bottom line, the exit strategy are documented in the ADM, Acquisition Decision Memorandum. So what is the role of the integrated product team? They go into more detail on page 15. Again, it's an integral part. That's to integrate all the different moving parts. Because when you build an equipment, it's not just that prime equipment, then you also got to have all the moving parts, the equipment, the wheels, the whatever it is, the GPS, the technology part of it, and all those teams have to work together to integrate and develop that product. So overarching at the bottom of page 15, and then you have the integrated and working level procedures, roles, and responsibilities on the bottom of page 16. All right, so how does the industry participate in this testing process? 4917 or these assessments. Industry participation, representatives may be invited to the WIPITs or the IIPT, integrated product meetings to provide information. So you can have the contractor in these working level groups because they can speak on the developmental side of that ins and outs of that equipment. And then the other members can speak to what it is that we want that equipment to do, and can it produce that result. On page 4919, let's see, I think they mentioned it later, but in that bullet, if you can see it at the top, because I don't see it at the bottom, in the, let's see, under types, at the very top, under you have roles of independent assessment, and you got the decision assessment, chapter 9.3. Then under that, you have independent assessment. And under that, those three bullets, you have types. The independent cost estimate is prepared by the Deputy Director for Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation, the DCAPE. Another name for DCAPE, and I'm giving you this because this is the 2011 study guides, and prior to the DCAPE, that same title, that same individual was CAIG, which is the Cost Analysis Integration individual. So DCAPE is responsible for doing the independent cost estimate. That's basically what it's saying there. Periodic reports. Once in a while, we need these reports. On page 4922, program deviation reporting. And deviation tells you, okay, I was supposed to go this direction, but I deviated and went somewhere else. So when the program manager has reason to believe that the current estimate, remember in the beginning, we started with the acquisition program baseline or initial estimate. So as you move along in the process, you realize what things really cost. And if there's an extensive amount of deviation from that initial, then the program manager indicates the performance cost, scheduled performance change will not be achieved. He or she will immediately notify the milestone decision authority of that deviation. How long does he have or she has? Within 30 days of the occurrence of the program deviation, they must report it to the milestone decision authority. Within 90 days of the occurrence of the program deviation, one of the following should have occurred. The program is back within the acquisition program baseline parameters, or a new acquisition program baseline was approved to change the perimeters, right? So either you bring it back to what everybody approved, or you have to get an approval for a new acquisition program baseline. 30 days to notify a program deviation. Within that 90 days, you either got to go back to the original acquisition program baseline, or you got to get approval for a new acquisition program baseline. Selected acquisition reports on page 23. So that's how you're going to break down the reports. So these are the SAW reports. The SAW reports is the status of the total program cost, schedule, and performance, as well as any unit cost and cost breach information. I'm on the third paragraph at the bottom of page 23. The SAR for the quarter ending December 31st is the annual SAR. The program manager must submit the annual SAR within 60 days after the president transmits the budget to Congress. So the president must submit the budget to Congress no later than the first Monday in February. So what it's saying, again, the SAR, S-A-R, that's a report. The PM must submit the SAR within 60 days after, so 60 days after the first Monday in February. The annual SAR is mandatory for all programs that meet SAR reporting criteria. At the bottom of page 23, the current estimate exceeds the program acquisition unit cost objective. So let's back up. So the program manager will submit SARs. Here we go. So this is the requirement that says when a SAR is required. Not later than 45 days after the quarter ends. Quarterly SARs are reported on an exception basis as follows. So if you have these conditions, then it requires a quarterly SAR, not just the annual. The current estimate exceeds the program acquisition unit cost objective or the average procurement unit cost objective of the currently approved acquisition program baseline. So that goes back to what we said before, that deviation, both in base year dollars by 15% or more. So if it's 15% or more deviation, then you got to do a SAR at that time. You don't wait until the end of that year. Page 4924, SAR termination. The USD AT&L can consider terminating SAR reporting requirement when 90% of the expected production deliveries or planned acquisition expenditures have been made. So you can terminate the need for SAR. At the top of page 4925, unit cost reports. When you did module 2, cost and economic analysis, you did the program acquisition unit cost and the average procurement unit cost, you did those calculations. And so that's mentioned here. So those reports must be submitted. Significant cost growth notification requirement on the bottom of page 25. The PM will notify the component acquisition executive immediately whenever there's a reasonable cause to believe that the current estimate is either the PAUC or the APUC has increased 15% or more. So you see, this is the same thing I just read, right? I don't see any difference. Only thing added respectively, or 30% or more over the PAUC or APUC of the original acquisition program baseline. All right, nothing there. And then let's move on to competency area number 10, special management activities. So a joint acquisition program, let's go to page 410.2. As part of the JCIDS, Joint Capabilities Integration and Development System, the Joint J8, with the assistance of the U.S. Joint Forces Command and additional joint forces, evaluates all joint capabilities, right? Because we want to integrate these systems, not operating on our own. A joint acquisition is the definition on the joint acquisition management, defined, F-I-N-E-D. A joint acquisition is any acquisition system, subsystem, component, or technology program with a strategy that includes funding by more than one DoD component. I need Air Force money, Navy money, Army money. That becomes a joint program. Designation, designated by the Milestone Decision Authority, who will decide whether to place a program under joint acquisition management. Execution, The designated lead executive DoD component for a joint acquisition should act on behalf of all the DoD component. If the Army is the lead, they're representing other services in that program. If the Air Force is the lead, they're represented. That's what it's saying under the execution. Pretty straightforward there. Continuing with competency number 10, on page 4.10.6, international considerations and program strategy. At any phase and explore within this acquisition strategy. During the development of the initial acquisition strategy for a new program, the potential for international research, development. If we're going to incorporate international forces into the use of these equipment, those considerations must be considered throughout the process. So that goes back to the protection plan that is put in place and so forth by the program manager. Not much here in 6, more documents on 11. Okay, I see a highlight here, program security instruction. On page 12, I have delegation of disclosure authority letter per DoD instruction, DODI 5000.02, a written authorization to disclose classified or controlled unclassified information must be obtained prior to entering discussions with foreign partners. That's no biggie right there, right? So DDL, the disclosure letter must already be in place if you're going to deal with foreign partners. And let's go back to the PSI on the bottom of page 11. PSI details security arrangements for the program and harmonizes the requirements of the participants' national laws. All right, so program security instructions and DSI or DSL, delegation of disclosure authority letter. And when dealing with contract reports on page 410.15, contract management reports is applied to all defense related contracts. So, all right, I do have a few things here. On page 16, cost and software data reports, CSD, may be used to do the following. So that's just saying you can use software or reports to do that. But what the meat and potatoes of this is page 17, the second paragraph. The CSDR, which is the contractor cost data report. That's one you should know. System principally involves 2 formal contractor reports. So you either have the CCDR, which is a collection of actual costs, and the software resources data report, which is a supplement, and it supplements more additional information on the different costs. So let's read what it says. The contractor cost data report focuses on collection of actual costs, while software resource data reports supplement these costs with software metrics. So it's to help, kind of like when you have a report, a status of fund, and then you have a bar chart, or you have a chart to actually supplement, to explain the information that provides a better understanding. So that's what they're talking about. So contractor cost data report and the software resources data to support that report, right? Okay, so close. And you have a slide or diagram on page 18 that tells you the CCDR reports, and when you read through it, it says subsequent to milestone A approval is valued at more than $50 million. So 50 million. So if something is valued more than 50 million, then you need to do a contractor cost data report, regardless of contract type. Then you have software resources. You can use software, all major contracts and subcontracts, regardless of contract type, and maze programs subsequent to milestone and approval for any software development, element with a projected software. So software greater than 20 million, software. The SRDR requirement on high risk or high technical interest contracts priced below 20 million is left to the discretion of the DoD program manager. Next, on page 19, contract performance report. Program manager should obtain a CPR on all contracts that meet or exceed the earned value management dollar threshold, and therefore requires compliance. So what's that dollar threshold? If I'm not mistaken, it's 20 million. So EVM on all projects more than 20 million. The following guidance applies: flexibility, fixed price. I'm not going to go through all that. And in case you want to get some more information on the EVM dollar threshold, on page 20, it tells you subcontracts and other agreements valued at or greater than 20 million in that second paragraph. The integrated master schedule is applicable to development, major modification, and low rate initial production efforts. It is not typically applied to full rate production, also not normally required for contracts valued at less than 20 million. So not only you do the CPR, program manager should obtain the contract performance report, but an integrated master schedule. On page 41021, contract fund status report. No particular application thresholds. However, the program manager should carefully evaluate the application to contracts of less than 1.3 million. Government contract quality assurance. What's the key thing here? Validate accuracy of that vendor through that EVM process. And then I think towards the middle, they mention the DCMA, Defense Contract Management Agency, provides quality assurance personnel conduct quality assurance as identified in contract administration delegations to the DCMA. The responsible technical authority should ensure that appropriate product specification drawings. So that's where you have quality control by that DCMA personnel to make sure that the contract is written properly, everything is documented. So government contract quality control is the responsibility of the DCMA. Acquisition planning, special management activities on page 25. So I think how I saw this list again was you have to know them in order. So you have acquisition of service planning. That's the various elements of that special management activity for acquisition services. Review and approval, peer reviews, data collection, and the Klinger-Cohen Act compliance. Klinger-Cohen Act. Make sure you know those in order. Let me see if they go into any detail. Acquisition planning, so they go through each one. Acquisition planning on page 26. Review and approval on 27. Peer reviews, let's see what they say. USD ATNL reviews. On page 29, 41029, is another individual. So you have the USD ATNL we've talked about, the DK in charge of the independent cost estimate. We talk about the DCMA that review that contractor reviews. And now let's see what we have. The Director of Defense Procurement Acquisition Policy, the DPAP, there's a lot of acronyms. DPAP shall maintain a list of acquisition services program expected to exceed $1 billion. So the DPAP is responsible for keeping the list of all the acquisition programs that's over $1 billion. DPAP keeps the list over $1 billion. Voila. The Director of PEP at the bottom will organize review teams and facilitate pre-award and post-award processes for the peer review. So independent peer reviews, number 3. Post-award peer reviews, data collection. Let's see, so we're still on. That's my data collection. It's on page 31. A lot of this is information. The key thing I'm going to walk away from this is to learn these things in order, all 5 of them in order. And then the Klinger-Cohen Act of 1996 on page 33. And all that says is all acquisition programs that include IT services, regardless of acquisition of services, are subject to Title 40 U.S. Code, the Klinger-Cohen Act. So let's see what it says. Is there anything that points out specifically? IT program, more than 500 million, must ensure compliance before final solicitation. You can read through, all of this is straightforward on page 33. That's it. Okay, and that's it for the study guide. Let me look through my notes, make sure I covered. All right, so we went over competency 8, test and evaluation, which covers about 9% of the questions that you'll be asked on the exam. What does test and evaluation do? DT&E, developmental, operational test and evaluation, test live fire, we talked about that. The role of milestone A, B, C, and LRIP, the test in milestone A, the temp in milestone B. Both have to be submitted 45 days prior to milestone A and prior to milestone B for the temp. Competency 9, decision assessments and reports. The 4, major decision reviews. No, decision points, milestone decision points initiate program milestone A, B, C, and the full rate of production. We have 2 types of decision points, milestone decisions, and we went over those decision reviews. Let me make sure I have those in here. I better double check. Decision reviews, I need to go back over that part. All righty, for myself. Who reports current estimate of each acquisition program baseline? That is the program manager. The role of the USD AT&L, who advises. So we went through all of this. And let's go to competency 10, 19%. So there's a lot in here, 19%. What are joint acquisition programs? We went over that. Who decides to place programs on the joint? That's the milestone decision authority. What is the contractor cost and software data reporting? System involves 2 formal contractor reports, contractor cost report, CCDR, and the software resources data report. CCDR contains the actual cost and the SRDR supplements with software. Program manager obtains the integrated master schedule. All costs are in incentive contract. IMS is not required for contracts less than 20 million. What is the CPR? Contract performance report. The PM shall obtain from the contractor a CPR, which is a DD form 2734 on all contracts that meet or exceed EVM dollar threshold. EVM thresholds. What is contract funds status report? Has no specific application threshold, but PM should evaluate the contract of less than 1.3 million. What are government contract quality assurance? The DCMA is a quality assurance personnel that conducts quality assurance as identified in contract administration delegations by the KO. They validates the accuracy of the EVM. Services, engagement of the time, effort, primary purpose is to perform identifiable tasks or tasks rather than an end item. What are the 5 acquisition service elements? That's the 5 elements we ended with: acquisition planning, review and approval, independent management reviews, data collection, Klinger-Cohen Act. What is independent management reviews? Those are peer reviews. The director, DPAP, organizes review teams and facilitate pre-award and post-award reviews for all service contracts with a value of $1 billion. He keeps the list. Software resources data report, SRDR, supplements CCDR costs with software metrics. We already said that. And for example of a question that you may be asked with these acquisition service elements, the 5 phases of acquisition service include acquisition of services, planning, review and approval, data collection, compliance with the Klinger-Cohen, and which one is missing? So basically, not that you necessarily have to learn them in order. What it looks like is you need to know what all 5 is. So if they throw an extra one in there and they tell you to pick out which one is a acquisition service element, then you need to know it's independent management reviews or your peer reviews that was missing out of that list. Okay, that wraps it up for CDFM Module 4. All competency 1 through 10 has been completed. And so at this point, you should be able to go back through the material. Repetition, repetition, repetition is the only way in which you're going to be successful to remember this information. So this is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. I thank you guys for stopping by, and I'll see you guys again next time on the CDFM study group.